Hi, so I hope you got something out of Denise's testimony. This is the second part of the mental health story that I'm trying to tell. And one of the things I just wanted to touch on before I got into introducing you to this next person um, was just to sort of expand on the issue of the systemic dangers for women and children in this case that are happening in mental health wards. And there was a couple of articles that kind of came past me that I thought were particularly interesting that kind of drew some of the issues together. So, this has been going on for a very long time, and you may or may not have been aware of it, but I think it's important to illustrate it and to bring it into the kind of dialogue in terms of the fight back for, women's rights and spaces in terms of the NHS battle. And over time, there have been a number of coroners who've drawn attention to a lot of deaths that have taken place within mental health services. And there's an article in the Independent that I'm going to put up for you, which talks about 50 preventable future death reports that various coroners had written that illustrated very widespread failures in mental health services across 26 different trusts and private providers, so not just the NHS setup. And some of the things that they identified that were particularly problematic in terms of these failures, and to be honest, this is something which has concerned me for a very long time, but were this issue of not identifying or having the skills in order to care for people's physical well-being as well as their mental well-being within the mental health dynamic. So failure, for instance, to think about things like their ability to carry out CPR if someone had a cardiac arrest, or a general lack of awareness about physical health problems generally. So, for instance, about managing acute health problems like blood clots or acute diabetic emergencies, etc. And this isn't just in terms of nursing, this is also in terms of doctors and their ability or knowledge or sort of contemporary knowledge to provide emergency care. And that could be in terms of, managing anaphylaxis and side effects from drugs, etc. The other thing some of these reports talk about is the long-term health issues of some of these patients, because obviously some of them are residing there for a very long time. Long-term issues like obesity not being managed, and conversely issues such as malnourishment affecting people's health, and also lack of exercise. They make note that people with severe and ongoing mental health problems are likely to die much earlier, up to 15 to 20 years earlier than people who don't have those conditions, which is incredibly sad. There's this other article which talks about people dying from starvation because of this sort of lack of attention to detail. And obviously one of the things which comes up in both the videos is this sort of lack of staffing and patients being left alone for long periods. So obviously, quite possibly during meal times. Meal times are always a difficult issue in all areas of healthcare in terms of feeding people who are not able to feed themselves. But obviously, this is critically important as well in this situation. One of the other things which really, really worried me was it was another issue where children are also being admitted to adult mental health wards. Now, children and adolescent mental health services have been under crisis for a very long time, and many parents will know this. If you've tried to get your child help for eating disorders, for suicidality, for OCD issues, for depression, anxiety, all sorts of different problems, because there just isn't enough support in the community. And what's been happening is that under 18s who are suffering from acute psychiatric situations, basically because there isn't enough beds in England. I'm saying England because that's the report that I'm talking about in terms of the Care Quality Commission. in their report, which relates to 21-22 period. They looked at, they basically illustrated that these children were being admitted to adult wards because there was this deficit of inpatient beds available for children, and because there was nowhere else to put them. So essentially, that's a huge safeguarding issue for those children. And obviously there was not enough community services available to deal with them at home and support them in the community. So they did a kind of, well, we'll just have to slam them into an adult acute environment, which is clearly a high risk situation. I mean, overall, I think there is a question to be asked in terms of children and paediatric care, in terms of genderology and everything that we're talking about in the kind of broader picture of the rise in young people and children identifying as having 101 gender identities and some kind of transgender identity, but also the pathologization of the normal life cycle, and thoughts and feelings and difficulties are now obviously classified as a mental health condition in many respects. And obviously the impact of social media and self-diagnosis. And you don't have to spend very long on social media and something like TikTok to see a whole load of teenagers identifying as having multiple personality disorders, autism and ADHD, and self-harming scars, etc., etc. So you basically got a perfect maelstrom of conditions. So I just wanted to kind of throw that into the picture before you have a little listen to our kind of next picture, and then I'm going to move on to look at the NHS broadly, look at the adult care environment, and then I'm going to move on to look at issues around disability and home care. Okay, so I'm really excited to speak to a good friend of mine actually now. This is Hitch, who I've known for a number of years through Standing for Women. And we've spent much time talking about all of the different aspects of the gender wars. So we do know each other really well. So Hitch, I'm incredibly pleased to welcome you here today for you to have a little chat to me about mental health experiences and all of the ins and outs. And you are basically a veteran of the whole kind of, battle that we're in at the moment. So you're very welcome. Thank you for coming.
Well, thanks, Isla. It was really feel quite honoured to be on your channel. Yeah, I suppose we are veterans of the gender wars now, aren't we? Time goes so quickly, and you realise, God, I've been doing this for like 5-6 years now. Bloody hell, where did that all go?
I know that we've probably got the wrinkles to prove it, but one of the things that I'm talking about is I'm trying to sort of unravel this kind of story for people about the kind of complexities of the NHS and how it is currently impacting women's health, and specifically in regards to this video about mental health care. And I know that you've had some personal experiences as a patient. And obviously you've got the kind of layer of your specialist knowledge about the women's rights issue. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background in terms of that experience.
Well, I was sectioned in 2018. I have bipolar, and I was slap bang literally in the middle of the menopause. I hadn't menstruated for a year, which a psychiatrist, when he diagnosed me, did warn me that many women with bipolar are sectioned once and once only in the middle of the menopause. And indeed, that did happen to me. It was the scariest experience of my life. 5 years later, and I don't, it's one of those before and after life experiences, not the person I was prior to that. I strongly suspect I have PTSD from it, but obviously I don't want to go anywhere near them to try and get diagnosed. I don't want anything to do with mental health services, not only because of how they treat us generally, which is not very well, but because the added genderology of them all. You know, they would end up seeing me as very hostile if that subject ever were to arise.
So what happened when you on that kind of an initial admission then? What was it like for you as a patient?
Well, the very initial admission was to a hospital called Littlemore for like, observation before they decide whether or not you're going to be sectioned. And that was absolutely horrendous. I wouldn't wish that experience on anybody. You kind of put in a padded cell. It's got a little separate bit with a toilet in, but there's no privacy wall, never mind door. So for somebody sitting just outside your room all the time, that can be a man or a woman. If you want to go to the toilet, you have to ask them for tissue. There's no toilet roll in there. And then they watch you while you use the toilet.
That sounds incredibly dehumanizing.
Oh yeah, that was just awful. I mean, at one point it sounded, there was this massive noise coming from the room next door and our adjoining walls. I mean, I didn't even know there was a room next door because I was, you know, I was away with the fairies. Let's be honest, I was having a very manic, borderline psychotic episode. And all of a sudden there's this noise that sounds like a horde of zombies are literally about to come through the wall. And it was so frightening. And they wouldn't tell me what that was. They just wouldn't say. And they would say things to you like, well, if you don't shut up, you're never getting out of here. They tried to give me make me take medication. They wouldn't tell me what the meds were. And I was trying to explain to them, I can't take it if I don't know what it is, because I'm on lots of other meds. You don't know what those meds are because you haven't asked me. And they were like, well, if you won't take them, we'll come in and pin you down and make you take them, you know, inject you. And I said, well, crack on then. And they didn't. But obviously by the time the psychiatrist saw me in the morning, I was literally a gibbering wreck, mostly from fear of what had gone on in the previous 8 or 9 hours. So they then popped me in an ambulance and took me over to the Warnford, without telling me where I was going or why I was going there or what the hell was going on. I was just in an ambulance with 2 men who were nice, but it was very scary. So then I ended up at the Warnford on a locked ward. Now it was a single sex ward, apart from the staff. There were a lot of male staff and some of them were quite nice. But at night, all the staff were male. And they were enormous, great big men. They were like bouncers, not like what you would think of maybe as a mental health care worker. And they were not very nice.
Was it a kind of what was the environment? What did it feel like in terms of the people who were clearly distressed? I mean, was it kind of, you know, a bit of a manic, noisy environment?
Oh God, yeah, it was so noisy at times. There was one quite young girl who would literally scream for days. Oh, don't know what was going on for her.
And how long were you there for?
I think it was about 3.5 weeks.
Right.
And I got sprung on a legal technicality by my family. There's some specific law they have to invoke, and which gives the psychiatrist 48 hours to basically prove you're a risk, and if they can't, they have to let you go.
Yeah.
They didn't want to let me go because I was still very manic. I mean, I was bouncing off ceilings, but I was, you know, quite happy. I wasn't a risk to anybody, so thank God they had to let me go.
And you had another experience where there was a kind of or is this the same one where you had this mixed sex day room?
I did spend time in another psychiatric hospital. I was a voluntary inpatient following a suicide attempt, and that was, the beds were, the sleeping area was single sex, but the day room was mixed sex, and it was complete chaos. I mean, absolute chaos. There was one man in particular who, if we were trying to watch the TV, he would just march through the room and turn the TV off, and he would do that, 20 times an hour. It was quite scary.
And I know that you've been reading quite a bit about the CQC reports with regard to mental health, as have I. I mean, what was your kind of impressions when you were thinking about looking at I mean, they're quite shocking, aren't they?
Absolutely. What shocked me most is, I've kind of read the figures that they'd uncovered, 900 odd incidents of sexually inappropriate behaviour or sexual assaults, and I didn't realise until I went and read the addendums that was only over a 3-month period. I'd assumed that was like for the whole year. No, that was for a 3-month period, amongst, I think it was 56 mental health trusts. So I don't know how many mental health trusts there are in the country, so I don't know what percentage of them were represented. And it all reads quite nicely. We need to protect these patients. Maybe we should have more single sex wards, until they then bring in the LGBTQ plus, because it's the T that they're really talking about there. You combine with their Annex B, you can't have single sex wards, because if a man rocks up and claims he identifies as a woman, he'll be accommodated with the women.
Well, there's looking retrospectively, there was a huge point in time where obviously we had this body of knowledge, that women were much more safe and comfortable if they were treated in single-sex spaces within the NHS. And this was, decades worth of work and dialogue. And what I'm seeing much more recently, and actually across the estate, in the NHS estate, there is a huge quantity of these kind of mixed sex environments. Even if there are some single sex spaces, but there's a lot of interaction. But what I was interested in is that actually, and I'll include it in some of the videos, they're actually building new mixed sex environments because of the lobbying of LGBT groups. And one of the articles that I thought I'd just draw your attention to, I was just having a look for it, which was published in this Mental Health Today. I haven't got my proper reading glasses on, but basically it was written by this non-binary, I have to get a bit closer to my computer, non-binary writer, who's basically talking about the absolute level of just distress. Being referred to as a woman brings about a sharp pang, a feeling of disgust with my body, my voice, and my mannerisms. So essentially what they're saying is that that all wards should be gender neutral, because this sharp feeling of a sharp pang is enough to create such a feeling of violence against their person, that all women's safety clearly is not important enough, despite our body of knowledge about the fact that they do better, and B, the amount of violence which is committed against women in the general population and in NHS environments like mental health wards. And actually they're getting away with this. So these little woolly, silly little articles, which I'll include, and I might talk about it a little bit and attach an addendum to this little video. I was actually shocked about the power, because this is incredibly serious business, that they're having such an impact, because you're talking about women who are incredibly vulnerable. They've often experienced sexual violence in their relationships. They often have long-term mental health problems, and they're in and out of these wards, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's not often just a one-off. I mean, what you've described in terms of your the hormonal impact of your crisis is not unusual, actually. And sometimes women who've had serious postpartum psychosis, you know, after their children,
Yeah.
and then have a long period of feeling quite well, then enter the menopause, and then they have another serious episode which takes them entirely by surprise, and that can be, you know, quite catastrophic. And then, you know, all the other different, you know, mental health things that people deal with. The staffing, I mean, did that shock you? The fact that the staffing points that they brought up, and also they mentioned about children, didn't they? That there was possibly mixing this whole adolescent and children part in terms of bed placement.
It's just insane. The whole thing is just appalling. I do know a couple of other women who were in psychiatric units when they were children. So this is going back. And while they were in these psychiatric wards, they were exposed to male adults. And they were sexually abused. They did see men masturbating, and, you know, far worse than that. So why are we going back to all this? We know what happens. Why is somebody's distress there at being faced with the reality of their body? You are a woman on a woman's ward. Why is that so much more important than everybody else's rights and feelings? And as you say, women on mental health wards, they're not a dissimilar demographic to women in prison.
Yeah,
Very,
exactly.
very vulnerable women who've often experienced child sexual abuse, often in or have left domestic abuse as adults. We are drugged up to the eyeballs, especially at night. You know, we're all quite sedated at night. A lot of women can be sexually disinhibited during crisis periods. You know, that's definitely something that can happen with bipolar. I don't know about other conditions, but I suspect it does. Very prone to being manipulated. Many of us have been gaslit during other abusive relationships, and you get us on a ward and then you're going to gaslight us again about what a woman actually is. And I think the other thing that a lot of people don't realise is that when you're on these wards, you don't see much of your actual psychiatrist.
Yeah.
You maybe see them once a week, and all they're really interested in is the medication side. But obviously they've got the power of whether you're getting out or whether you might be sent to a even more secure environment, which I was threatened with because I did manage to escape at one point, but that's another story. So the psychiatrist's information is feedback from the staff. So if there's a man who claims to be a woman on that ward, either as a patient or a member of staff, and we're refusing to be gaslit and we're saying that's the man, that's going to go in our notes. We're going to be written up as being hostile. They could even claim that we're a risk to others because we don't use gendered language. We use, you know, factual sex-based language. I could see them saying, well, that means Miss X is a risk to other people. I mean, you just see a situation where you're so trapped, you've got no agency when you've been sectioned, when you're on a locked ward. You can't, you just don't have anything. And although you do have the right to see a solicitor, I tried that the first day I got in. Well, 4 weeks later, they finally got back to me, and I'd already managed to get out of it by then. So they're not going to be like a rapid response unit. And as we know, much of the legal industry is also captured. So if we were in a position where we actually needed to complain about a man who claims to be a woman, staff or patient, I think we'd be in very, very poor position.
In fact, we know of that case of the nurse manager, don't we?
That's horrendous.
Who moved his office to be closer to the women, and moved them onto the women's ward, who, you know, not going to talk about it in too much detail, but obviously, the gaslighting of women who are, seeing a man before their eyes and being told that no, they're a woman. That if we step back for a moment and we think about the historical issue and how women and how mental health, mental illness,
Mm.
as it was, and how women were treated in asylums. If we go back, the things that they did to women, we haven't really. This is being played out really in terms of the dehumanizing nature of it all. So obviously, these having had an admission for an acute psychiatric episode, and being under section must have a sort of knock-on impact on the sort of bigger family issue in terms of your role in parenting, and what happens as a result of that.
Well, it automatically triggers an investigation by children and families to make sure your children are going to be safe, which obviously is fair. They do need to do that. So it can mean that when you come out, you're still separated from your children while they undertake the investigation, which in my case took months because the social worker involved kept going on holiday. Then my so-called care coordinator kept going on holiday. And that was just terrifying, absolutely terrifying. They all wore rainbow lanyards
Right.
all the time. So, if there had been anything on your notes from your time inside that you'd been hostile towards trans people, that's going to follow you, and that's going to have an impact on your chances of getting your child back. Now, I was lucky. My daughter stayed with her much older brother while all this was sorting out and while I was in hospital, because they had said, we'll put her in emergency care. But luckily, my adult son was able to care for her. So everything was, very calm and good fun and a bit like an extended holiday for her, really. But yeah, they've all got so much power over very vulnerable women. You're still vulnerable when you come out. You can't just discharge yourself from the care of the community mental health team, because they might resection you, they might, remove your child. They've got all the power, the patient's got none.
And I think that the issue of stigma is really important, because despite the fact that people talk about mental health all the time, I can't actually remember when this word came about, but I remember at the time it irritated me because I thought, people don't really mean it, because they're not really talking about mental ill health at all, because people still run a mile when you talk about people being psychiatrically unwell, the stuff that you're talking about. There's a huge amount of shame and stigma and fear. And I actually think that women in mental health units are a real forgotten population. They're incredibly vulnerable, but no one really, very few people want to advocate and jump in and try and sort out some of their needs, because the impact of self-ID, especially in this environment, is absolutely, I mean, if they really do go down this full mixed sex environment, gender neutral arena, because of these few people who are, going to be so brutally offended by the concept of misgendering, etc., etc. We're in these women are in huge trouble.
Oh, definitely. The stigma is forever. I mean, 5 years on, and it still causes problems in my life. I still haven't got a full driving license back. I have to keep reapplying. I have to keep renewing the bloody thing.
Right.
Even though I've got like 20 years plus of no claims bonus, and one speeding ticket ever 20 years ago, because I've been sectioned and manic, I have to keep renewing. So it never leaves you. And then to add on to that, the self-identity issues. I don't know why they want to torment and persecute vulnerable, unwell women in this. It's sadistic. It's just so cruel. We've done nothing wrong. We're locked up. We've already lost our liberty, even though we've done nothing wrong.
I mean, essentially, in the bigger picture of the whole, issue in terms of the fact that the Equality Act, obviously, we know has this very key ability to protect women in terms of our protected characteristic of sex, and we should and are entitled to single sex spaces, and this is absolutely set down. There is this key misunderstanding about the role of the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. Women are still entitled to single sex spaces despite this other protected characteristic. But then we have the Gender Recognition Act 2004, which came and is what's causing us so many issues, and we need to repeal it.
Oh, it's got to go. When men can legally be female, we will never get our single sex spaces back. Everybody's so confused over what these two pieces of legislation mean, the GRA and the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, that even though there are exemptions, they don't get used. We can't rely on exemptions. The law has to revolve around facts, not fictions. It's just such a stupid situation. And there's so much obfuscation within it all. I mean, they call it, a protected characteristic of gender reassignment. How could that even be a thing? We don't have a gender assigned.
No, we don't.
Reassigned.
Gender, the word gender doesn't even have any meaning in law.
Exactly.
The word sex does. There's no such thing as gender in law.
And then you combine that with the NHS and their Annex B, which constantly conflates sex and gender and confuses everything, and basically means that people go where they identify as, or if they're unconscious, the staff have to make a decision as to which gender they are based on, what they're wearing, basically.
Oh my God, imagine the pangs of difficulty that person would have when they woke up, I mean, I must remain serious.
Well, I was sectioned in jeans and wellies and a grubby t-shirt. How would they have decided where to put me? It's a miracle they managed to put me on a female ward at all, Isla.
It's nonsense, but I'm definitely going to cover the ins and outs of that in another video. In terms of the work that's been done to try and repeal Annex B, at one point we thought we were, this was going to be really rolling along, but I think that's actually stalled, and I know that a lot of parliamentarians are working really hard to try and make this happen. But the other thing that's really working against us, of course, is all of the lobby groups who are so embedded and entrenched in all these hospital trusts and NHS England, etc. And they're basically just telling them what the law is, which it's not. So of course, a lot of the hospitals are writing all of these policies, which are just a load of gobbledygook, essentially. We're talking. It's going to take years and years if we ever get to a point where we can try and roll all of this back. It's an absolute spider web. Well, look, Hitch, I'm really grateful to you to coming on and telling me some of your thoughts and your experiences. I'm really grateful. Thank you. I hope it wasn't too difficult for you.
No, not at all, Isla. It's my pleasure.
Take care.
And you.